Hello, good afternoon. My name is Charlotte Potter Kasic. I am the interim director here at the Barry Art Museum. We are located on the Old Dominion University campus in Norfolk, Virginia. We were founded by art collectors Richard and Carolyn Barry in 2018. Our permanent collection has strong holdings in contemporary glass, American modernist paintings, marine paintings, historic dolls, and automatons. I'm very pleased to welcome you here today to the VIP tour of our second changing exhibition, Orchids, Attraction and Deception. Today, we're joined by the Exhibition Advisory Board, Darrin Duling, Associate Director of the Arthur and Phyllis Kaplan Orchid Conservatory at ODU, Lisa Wallace, the J. Robert Stiffler Distinguished Professor in Botany at Old Dominion University, and Brett A. Windham, independent artist and writer. We need to thank our community partners here at the Barry Art Museum, the Kaplan Conservatory, the Norfolk Botanical Gardens, the Oak Springs Foundation, and the Harvard Museum of Natural History. Our programs and exhibitions are made possible by our generous museum sponsors, James A. Hickson, Connie Jacobson, Linda H. Kaufman, the Rudder Family Art Foundation, and John Wine. We are very grateful to the ODU Office of Community Engagement for helping to produce this new series of artist lectures. Over the course of this conversation, we invite you to type in questions to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to take questions at the end of the tour. So jumping right in, I want to start to introduce you here to our intro gallery. The Oak Springs Garden Foundation is an operating estate dedicated to sharing the gifts and ideas of Rachel Bunny Mellon. Their mission is to support and inspire fresh thinking and bold action on the history and future of plants, including the art and culture of plants, gardens, and landscape. The Oak Springs Library has generously loaned rare and valuable volumes from our magazines, journals, scientific volumes, all dedicated to the study of orchids. From native Virginia orchids to more tropical varieties, through these illustrations, we can derive many of the themes that our artists in our exhibition connected to in collection, propagation, beauty, exoticism, shipping, and trading, and just the delight of finding a surprise flower in the field. To start, we're going to begin with this piece right here. And I'm going to invite Lisa to speak a little bit more about this Virginia native orchid.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this is a hand-colored engraving of Habaneria Cellularis, which is currently known as Platantra Ciliaris in the scientific community. It's very interesting that this would have appeared in a British magazine because this is an exclusively North American species. And so it shows that these orchids were pulled up from North America and taken over to Europe for the trade. This particular species is very interesting because it is known as the orange fringed bog orchid, or sometimes the butterfly orchid, because it's pollinated by butterflies, swallowtail butterflies in particular. It is a component, one species of Platantra, which is our most diverse genus in North America of temperate orchids. It's also a favorite of mine and a topic of my research program here at ODU. Charlotte?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that insightful look into that first piece. Next, we have this absolutely incredible James Bateman book that we are so thrilled to have on view. And I'm going to welcome Darrin Duling to introduce the Bucket Orchid.
Hello, Charlotte. Thank you for asking me to speak today, and hello, everyone out there. We're looking at an illustration of the Bucket Orchid, specifically Coryanthes speciosa. It's an orchid which ranges from Mexico down into Brazil. And it's probably one of the most complex flowers on earth. It's amazingly complex in its structure as well as how it manipulates its insect pollinator. The lip of this orchid actually forms a bucket or a pouch that holds water. And there are two glands that are part of the structure that fill that bucket with water. And the lip also has a waxy coating which emits an aroma that attracts the bee pollinator. So the bee is attracted by the aroma. It comes in, and when it attempts to land on this lip, the waxy surface, see, it's double duty. It's fragrance as well as a slippery slope. The bee falls into this water and is half drowned, disoriented. the lip has a ladder-like series of ridges on one side, which allows the bee to climb out. And as it's climbing out, it's guided into a small opening in this flower. When the bee steps on the bottom of this opening, the flower partially closes in this area and pins the bee down for about 30 to 45 minutes, putting it into contact with pollen grains. And once it releases the bee then flies off. And fortunately for orchids, bees have very short memories. In fact, most insects apparently, because it goes over to yet another flower, the same thing happens. But this time when it crawls out and is smashed by the flower, the pollen is transferred to the second flower. And hey presto, you've got cross-pollination. So it's pretty amazing. We have 4 species of this orchid, including the one in the picture. And we're hoping to have it flower during the course of the exhibition. The catch is the flower only lasts for about 3 days. So we'll probably catch it on film or video and have it available for people to see versus in person.
Thank you so much, Darrin. That is absolutely fascinating. Who knew that orchids are a Venus flytrap? And then the final book we're going to talk about today is the Pink Lady Slipper. And we included this because you're going to see that there's a number of artists that respond to this piece in the exhibit. And this is a great time to introduce you to the cross-pollination lecture series. It's going to be the first Thursday of every month at 6 p.m. This Thursday, we're featuring Darrin, who you just heard from, along with renowned artist Paul Stankard. And they are talking about the Lady Slipper as origin story. So both artists and scientists talking about how they had a chance encounter with a lady slipper as a child, which then sent them off into wildly different career fields, which is really, really fascinating. Darrin becoming an expert in these orchids, and then Paul going on to become one of the forefathers of the studio glass movement. So here with me now, we have Brett Day Windham to introduce this piece here by David Willis.
Hi, Charlotte. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So to start, I just want to say that I was introduced to David Willis's work during a Pecha Kucha event that was hosted by the Berry during quarantine, where a group of artists came together and shared their work. And it was just a wonderful event, and I loved getting acquainted with David's work. So he's a master craftsman. And he kind of pulled glass blowing back to its most elemental material, the grains of the glass, in order to move his practice forward. He's creating a photorealistic image from these tiny, tiny kernels of glass, which are then suspended in polymer. So he kind of paints this image using the glass frit or grains and then suspends it. They are luminescent. They are somewhat trompe-l'oeil in appearance. And for us working on the show, they were reminiscent of both micro mosaics and Tibetan sand mandalas. He's creating a conceptual feedback loop with this work. He's employing glass, which is the same material that is used to manufacture the screens that we're staring at now and all day, to create an analog yet pixelated image. He created this new work for us specifically for the exhibition, and it's a close-up interpretation of the Phalaenopsis or moth orchid, and it's really stunning.
Thank you so much, Brett. That is an excellent synopsis of this piece by David Willis. Moving right along, we're going to introduce you to a local hero here. We have Brennan Baylor. Brennan Baylor is a professor here at Old Dominion University in printmaking. He had 3 pieces in a series he had already created. He actually was sort of helping us as an impetus for the show. As we were starting to do initial research, we realized that he already had this incredible work. So Brennan Baylor is a master printmaker. And as you can see here, he's juxtaposed a tropical Mexican orchid alongside this image, which is a stark, stark difference. You have this richness over here along with the map of Mexico, and then zooming in out from this one part of Mexico is what's called the dry corridor. It's an area where plants cannot grow anymore. And he's thinking a lot about the haves and the have-nots, who is able to afford to have a luxurious flower in North America, and then who is not able to even grow corn in their own native fields. So right off the bat, we're getting into some political waters here, some really, really important work. And over here, I'd like to introduce you to another one of his pieces called Orchid House One. And what's interesting about this piece is, again, sort of calling out our own locality here. This is an image from the Kaplan Conservatory. And here you can talk about all of the different species that are being taken, extracted from South America in thinking here, talking about colonization, this active taking, and bringing right back up to our space right here. He's also superimposed a fence line, thinking a bit about the political borders. To join me here today to talk a little bit more about this piece and the history of colonization, I'm going to invite Darrin.
Hello again. One thing I'd like to start off by saying is that indeed conservatories and glasshouses originally were follies for wealthy people, and they were very unscrupulous in building their orchid collections. They would send people out at great cost and have them bring back thousands and thousands of plants. There was no regard to how they were stripped from the environment, whether they were rendered extinct or etc. It was all about a collector's passion. But I'm happy to say today that conservatories and greenhouses are serving as botanical arcs, if you will. They are leaders in preserving and protecting these species, which are going extinct in their native land. Now, yes, there still are unscrupulous collectors going in and taking orchids out of the wild, but primarily orchids are going, and other plants and animals are going extinct because of land development, clearing, and other things. So it is an interesting sort of yin-yang between what started out as wealthy folks' folly, and now they're actually, the glasshouses are saviors of the planet.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it is important to think about the history and then the current realities of cultivation. So turning the corner here, there's a pretty fun reveal for all of you. I'm pleased to introduce Jennifer Angus's work. Jennifer Angus is a Canadian-American that works at the University of Wisconsin as a fiber instructor in their art department. We asked her to create this brand new piece just for us for the Barrie Art Museum. And we asked her to really ruminate on this thought or this idea of orchids, attraction and deception. I asked her specifically to try to create a piece using dried orchids and the pollinators of orchids. So she's created this absolutely wonderful Victorian wallpaper that is created out of real dried orchids in these glass domes and real insects that are pinned to the wall almost scientifically. And it comes out with this beautiful exploded Wunderkammer. It feels like one of those wonderful old museums that you would see that's got this new fanciful approach. You'll see that a lot of the different pollinators that she's talking about are bees, hummingbirds, moths, wasps, and even fungi. Angus's mature material vocabulary is comprised of real insects, hand-dyed fabric, flowers, because Angus is a professor of textiles, decals, antique printed matter, and antique glass domes. Many of these objects used here to great effect create a bountiful swarm of activity. And to join us to talk a little bit about orchid pollinators, I'd like to invite Lisa Wallace to maybe just point out or just talk about a bit of the pollinators that we do see in the field.
Sure, hello again. So orchids, aside from their flowers, are so well known for their interactions with pollinators, and they range from the very exciting to the downright bizarre. Orchids are pollinated by everything from mosquitoes to mice and all forms in between. We see hummingbirds, we see lots of butterflies and moths pollinating them, and they've often evolved very deceptive ways of attracting pollinators and then getting them to move their pollen about. So it is a fantastical world of biology involving orchids and their pollinators, and I think that very much is reflected in this piece.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'd like to direct our attention over here to this one because it's a really nice foci or portal into another discussion that we're going to be welcoming. This is the vanilla flower. Who knew that is an orchid? It didn't occur to me when we first started the research. And we have paired Jennifer Angus with another professor of botany at the University of Wisconsin, who will be discussing vanilla in their cross-pollination conversation a little later on in the series. So stay tuned for that. Next, we'd like to turn our attention here to the center of the gallery, and we give you Tiffany Turner.
So I'm going to introduce Tiffany's work. Tiffany works in the Bay Area. She's trained as an architect and has gathered really great renown for her incredible paper flower work. She was making orchids as a virtual workshop during quarantine, and that kind of led us to her, and we were able to work with her to have her create this incredible, another Phalaenopsis moth orchid sculpture out of paper for the exhibition. So once again, it's pretty impossible to ignore the specter of colonization in the reference material for Turner's sculpture. She worked from a 17th century Spanish woodcut of a moth orchid, which had been collected in Mexico. So in the 17th century from Mexico to Spain. So in her interpretation, as in a Dutch still life, each detail of the sculpture has clues and signifiers, symbols for other things. So as she explains it, the blooms in the center are blue, which represents the practice of dyeing flowers as found now in modern floristry, and providing a metaphor for the lengths that humans will go to manipulate our appearance for beauty's sake. The two side stems that bowed down, they've been cut, and they're beginning to wilt and drop and droop and drop their flowers. All three of the stems lack buds. All of the flowers are in bloom, which suggests that hope may not always spring eternal, and that some ideas should not continue to blossom. So there's a lot of symbolism and meaning behind the work. Tiffany Turner's aptitude for meticulous craftsmanship and engineering is evident throughout. Her personal depictions of flowers, which range from micro to incredibly macro, we encourage you to look her up, are marked by her interest in imperfection, aging, and decay.
Thank you, Brett. And moving right along, we're going to start to talk over here at the other side of the gallery of Paul Stankard's beautiful work.
Yeah, so I'm going to continue. The process of helping with this exhibition has introduced me to so many fantastic artists, and Paul Stankard is a legend, and I'm so pleased to be acquainted with him and his work. The extraordinary generosity that he showed in loaning quite a few of his orbs and paperweights for this exhibition is really astonishing. Throughout his groundbreaking career, he established the ability to create plant life from glass with extraordinary delicacy and a really monastic focus. His orb series, which was among the first one that we saw as the full circle, the orbs, have both a dreamlike feeling and a nearly fecund realness, which makes sense as he is an artist and a poet, passionately influenced by Walt Whitman, which we had a lot of fun talking about in our virtual studio visits. For his inclusion in this exhibition, I think you can see on your screen there, he created a pink lady slipper orchid, which I believe Charlotte mentioned that he and Darrin Duling will be speaking about later on during the exhibition, during the cross-pollination lecture series. It's based for him on his memory of picking one of these flowers for his mother when he was too young to know that native orchids are protected. And so she was very upset, and it created this very intense early childhood memory for him, which I think he holds really sacred now. So he has cultivated a deep reverence for botanicals, and he's really shaped his career around them. And we're so pleased to have this inclusion, and we're excited about the installation of the work where we have some of them lit from below. We have the orbs standing on their own, and you can read about them if you are able to visit the gallery. And we also have a video included of Paul making a piece and talking about the process of creating it, which is pretty extraordinary to watch, just the deftness of his hands at work.
Yeah, and in fact, I'm going to jump in because this moment right here was the biggest reveal for me, what's happening on the screen. And we are going to put a link up in the chat for all of you to this video because it's 3 minutes long. But as a glassblower myself, I was always miffed about how he was able to truly encapsulate these flora and fauna inside of these orbs. And in this very, very generous video that he was created for us, he shows us, he reveals the secret to this technique of how he merges two sides together to completely encapsulate these pieces, which I have to tell you, after studying glass for over 20 years of my life, I had no idea how these were made. And this was a big gift for him to give us this video. So I encourage you to watch it on your own at another time, and we can talk a bit more about that. So this is them polishing that piece. And what's interesting is both Paul and Deborah are in a very, very, very knowing way. Deborah Moore right here, who I'll talk about next, are nodding and referencing these scientists that have come before that would make these beautiful scientific models, right? And they were trying to do this for posterity. They wanted to make sure that these species could be known forever. And we're going to see a piece from the Balashka collection coming up in a little bit. And so both Paul and Deborah are referencing that kind of history, but they're doing it in completely different ways. Paul is using a process called flame working. And here we see Deborah Moore, who's using hot blown glass. And in fact, she was a visiting artist at the Chrysler Museum of Art a number of years ago. And a number of us locally had the opportunity and great honor to work with her to create these kinds of pieces. Deborah Moore is a African-American artist who is based in Seattle, Washington. She's widely lauded for her visionary glassblowing skills. And she's dedicated almost exclusively her practice to the joyful sculptural exploration of orchids. An obsession has grown from a chance encounter with a hardware store plant, of all things. She draws and watercolors the orchids she sees in her travels in her sketchbooks, and these become references for the sculptures. As a result, her style is much more personal than clinical, inspiring and appreciating the painterly quality she's able to achieve with glass. Following in the footsteps of historical scientific glass models and building from her formative years on Dale Chihuly's team, Moore has arrived at her own distinct vocabulary. We are so pleased to have this piece here in the show, and this is part of the Barry Art Museum's permanent collection. So it is all usually on view, although we did move it into this gallery specific for this exhibit. It also is a piece that inspired this entire show. So next we get to move on to somebody you've all heard from quite a bit already. I'm going to introduce Brett again to introduce her own artwork here in the exhibit.
The introduction for the introduction.
Yep.
So I think it would be best for me to start out by kind of explaining this unorthodox situation that we're in. So Charlotte and I have been working on projects together for more than 10 years now. And over a year ago, the idea for this exhibition came up, and she started talking about commissioning me to make a piece for the exhibition because I work with botanicals and cyanotypes. I knew exactly what I wanted to make, and as I started to make it, we continued talking and brainstorming as we often do, and we found that we couldn't stop. We were really excited. So she invited me to come on kind of as an artist, organizer, advisor to the exhibition. So while it's unusual for an artist to help to organize an exhibition that they're in, this seemed like sort of special and very joyful circumstances. So the work that I made, it's called the Tropicalian Diptych, and it's a cyanotype on paper. And so cyanotype is a very antiquarian photographic technique that was developed by Sir John Herschel in 1842, and then was kind of made famous, I think, by today's standards by Anna Atkins, who a lot of people I consider to be the first female photographer. And she would make her famous, her beautiful prints of algae and other botanical specimens. I made my first photograms when I was about 5. on the front porch of my parents' house. And I kind of returned to it over the past couple of years. I make a lot of collections. I love color. I often organize my collections by color. And so cyanotypes have been a way for me to continue that, making works on paper. So for this, it's a Phalaenopsis orchid, which I bought at a big box store. And I pressed it and dried it and printed it as mirror images, and then painted it with watercolors from both Britain and Japan. And I think one of the interesting things in organizing this show, that one of the themes that kind of developed as we moved forward, is just this sort of Victoriana orchid mania period of time, which, you know, has a lot to do with the poaching and gathering of orchids from other places and bringing them back, shipping them back to England. And then this is going on simultaneously. So there's a lot of rich subject matter in that Victorian era that you saw with Tiffany Turner's work and with Jennifer Angus's work, and with a couple of other people coming up. So that's sort of a nice tie-in to the rest of the work in the show. And I'm just really interested in color and beauty right now. I think we all need it.
Thanks, Brett. Thank you for your incredible contribution to this show. Turning the corner here, we are sort of arrested by this beautiful installation by Callista Lyon. And we're going to introduce you to begin with a historical drawing that she collected and was looking at and referencing.
Yeah, and I think so. This historical image of an orchid, the way that they're traditionally dissected and all of the individual parts of the specimen are presented to you flat like this, really inspired Callista when she then went on to make the interspecies intimacies, which is the long multi-part sculptural installation on the shelf next to it. We found Callista's work through Oak Spring, and she had done a residency there. And as one of the partners in the exhibition, they were generous enough to direct us to her. And she's just an incredible artist. Each one of these sculptures is a part of an orchid that she blew up and kind of reinterpreted, and used her novice ability with ceramic, applied that to the idea of sort of being a novice or an amateur botanist and collector and horticulturalist. And I think that the resulting sculptures are so charming and so full of pathos, and the colors are so beautiful. I just adore them. And they're really incredible to spend time with. As you can see, there are some very familiar forms, and then some really unfamiliar alien-like forms. Callista's practice is really wide-ranging. Again, I encourage you to look her up. She's a very poetic and very bold artist who really just goes where the work takes her and works in whatever medium she feels that the concept requires. So you'll see that we have the historical image, we have this sculptural installation, and Charlotte will talk about the third piece of hers that we have in this sort of set apart room created for her. And I would like to say that I think in the upcoming Berry Bites newsletter, I did an artist to artist Q&A with Callista, and I learned so much more about her practice, and she's just really generous with her thoughts. And she has a really unique take on the world and on botany and ecology, and she's just a fascinating artist.
You know, on a personal level, one of the things that I love the most about Callista is when we told her that the show was called Orchids, Attraction and Deception, she said, I really want to push back against that. I really don't like that. Why are we calling the orchid something that deceives? It's not deceiving, it's inviting. It's inviting some sort of collaboration. And I just love that she has this really like different and raw way of thinking about the work. And Brett hasn't had the opportunity, unfortunately, to see this in person. We've worked remotely on this whole show, but I have to say, being next to these, the thing that I find so fascinating is how they feel like organs. because they are like bodily. They're the size of a body. I don't know if you can see them next to you, but it really feels like you're starting to look at something that's human, not that something that's botanical. And so I think that that's something she plays with a lot in her work, which is a nice maybe segue over here to her final piece. So this is called Becoming With, and she decides to distort and move and like chase her own hand into some sort of position that's imagining herself as an orchid. Thinking again about the hand, the human hand, extraction, taking, but also cultivation, giving life to things, contortion. And this is just maybe one of my favorite, simplest pieces in the whole show, because she's found in such a simple way, some way to anthropomorphize her own self into becoming a species. And that is why it's called Becoming With. I should mention that there was going to be a cross-pollination lecture that features Callista Lyon, as well as Sir Peter Crane, who is the president of the Oak Spring Foundation. And that will be coming up, I believe, in April. And so mark your calendars, it's going to be excellent. Coming along this way, I want to introduce Roxana Azar. Roxana is an artist that actually went to VCU, which is somewhat local to us here in Norfolk. They studied as a photographer, and they did some really interesting things where they took these like sort of traditional classic images that you might find of pieces in a greenhouse. And then they decided to take them, recollage them, and print them on a completely different media over here. And so what you're seeing in front of you is sort of hard to see perhaps virtually. This is an incredible acrylic that was developed by NASA. It has this wonderful iridescent quality to it. And as the light passes through it, it creates yet a whole other pattern on the back wall. In a conversation with Roxy, they said that they specifically were interested in this idea of hope. A lot of their past work was about this dystopian concept of trying to allow the light to pass through this acrylic, which, by the way, cuts out all UV light. So if one was to create a greenhouse out of this, it would kill any plant inside of it. But they felt that at this moment, we really need hope. And they were talking about in the Iranian New Year, their mother would always put out the single orchid. And for them, in the midst of the pandemic, this is a piece of hope. And the final piece that we want to introduce you to, or the final artist, I should say, is over here. And this is Natalia Kent. And I welcome Brett back to talk about these works.
So Natalia Kent is an extraordinary photographer, and she was invited by Harvard to photograph the Ware collection of the Blaschka glass models of plants, which are incredibly famous, incredibly special historical models. Natalia is Czech, has Czech heritage, and the Blaschkas were Czech, so there's a beautiful companionship there. And we talked a lot with Natalia, and I was able to attend one of these lectures held by Harvard, where she talked about the process of photographing them along with the curator there, Jenny. She approaches all of her photography with this idea of world building. What does the subject need? How can I build this world around the object that I'm photographing? And she was able to create, in a very tiny, cramped space, where she often held her breath while photographing, because these historical models are so fragile and obviously completely irreplaceable, and was able to capture just such incredibly beautiful photographs of them. And Harvard was incredibly generous to let us present 3 images from one plant, one orchid, which I believe is a vanilla orchid, no? Tiger striped, pardon me. So Natalia's studio work and her commissioned work often overlap. In that way that I mentioned, that she does a lot of world building. And so what we were interested in, which I think is a really interesting summation of the whole idea of the show, is how does a contemporary artist interpret this historical material or this very traditionally approached material of recording an orchid, recording botanical specimens. And I think that, you know, you've seen all of this kind of referencing to Victoriana and Orchid Mania. One of the really interesting things about Natalia is that what you're seeing now on your screen is one of her studio pieces, her movement artifact prints, which are all one of a kind. She makes them in her studio in Los Angeles. And again, also, as with many of our photographers, there's a lot of kind of family history and inspiration that goes into the creation of the work. Her mother was a dancer. Her father is an acclaimed professor who created his own color theory, starting with, I think, the secondary colors instead of the primaries, and just reorganizing the whole idea of color. So she goes into the dark room and through kind of a similar process of world building, creates a space where through her own movements, moving objects, dancing, moving herself, getting into a really meditative space, she creates these movement artifact prints. And I think that there is a lot of somewhat abstract, somewhat conceptual ties between the incredible delicacy of these movements, which these are really monoprints. They can be captured once and then never again, and the way that she photographed the orchid. So it's kind of a big conceptual leap, but this is really what we wanted the show to be about. Not a dry historical show, which could provide some great insight into orchids, which I've now completely fallen in love with, but also how do we interpret this material as artists? What do we do with it now? What's happening now with art? And I think Natalia gives us a really beautiful example of that.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank Natalia for joining us today. Apparently she's on this, so thank you, Natalia.
Hi, Natalia.
We love the idea of ending with these two pieces because it is this stark juxtaposition of these scientific pieces that are talking about history, about model making, about science, and then the way that artists, contemporary artists, respond to these kinds of pieces and the kind of mark making that they do there. We are almost through, but before we end, there's a couple other things I wanted to quickly touch on. We have a number of ways that you can be involved, even if you don't live here in Hampton Roads. We'll tell you about all of them. We do have a lot of virtual engagement. So first there's the 3D self-guided tours, which will be on our website. This is completely self-guided. You can do it whenever you want from your couch. We have somebody coming in with a 3D camera. You'll be able to go up to every single piece, click on it, and then you'll be able to learn even more than the information we've given you here today. You can read the bio on the artist, see their headshot, read the label copy, et cetera, see their websites if they have them. So that'll be a great way of getting more information. We also are doing a multimedia tour with the museum's artist educators. So you can schedule your own tour for a group of 10 or more. Just go to our website, click on tours, and if you've got 10 people that all can jump into the same Zoom room with us, we will give you another private tour like this. And then finally, the first Thursday of every month, I mentioned it once before, but this cross-pollination series is the first of its kind that we've ever embarked upon, where we will be pairing the contemporary artists in our exhibition alongside a lot of botanists in the field. And so I should mention that we're so pleased that the curator from the Harvard Museum will be joining us for a conversation with Deborah Moore, who we spoke about earlier, for our final lecture of the series. And then in person, there is some ways you can participate. We're free and open to the public Tuesday through Friday, 11 to 5, weekends 12 to 5. It is a no-touch, hands-free experience. You can wave your hands by the front door. They magically open for you. We disinfect all the surfaces every hour. So of all places to come to, this is quite safe. And we also, just for the month of February, are offering in-person private tours. So you can, again, go to our website, click on it, and sign up for you and your friend or your loved one to come in and get a private tour here with one of our museum educators of this exhibit. It is a perfect Valentine's Day gift. And I would have to say that the majority of the people so far who have signed up have been couples that just want a little to get out for a date day. So we encourage you to think about all of that. Again, that's only offered for the month of February. And as VIPs and museum members, we encourage you to sign up soon. At this point, we are ready to take some Q&A. If anybody has any questions, please pop them into the question and answer box at the bottom of your screen, and we can go ahead. You have some incredible resources here at your disposal, having Darrin and Lisa and Brett, the whole board advisory committee for this exhibit. So hit us up. We are happy to take on all of your questions. Wow, are you guys all just stunned into silence? No one has any questions for us? You're just that good? That's fantastic. Is there anything else that you guys want to touch on, Lisa or Darrin or Brett, just about this experience and about working together? I mean, it's been really interesting trying to put together this entire show, I would say remotely. A lot of the pieces in the show, as we mentioned, have been commissioned specifically for the show, so they've never been seen before, which has been really fun to see like new pieces come to life and to challenge artists to create new works for us. Yeah, and so I would say that for myself personally, just coming here and having the opportunity to be around in the full presence of art again has been incredible. It's really felt so good after us all being isolated in our own little rooms for such a long time to be able to come here and be affronted with real live art.
We do have one question that just came in for
Okay.
Dr. Wallace.
Okay.
The question is, do you know of any areas near Hampton Roads to see the native butterfly orchid in person?
Lisa, did you hear that question or should I repeat it back?
I can see it in the chat.
Okay, great.
So yes, I do, but I prefer not to give out specific locations. Michelle, we can connect in other ways, and I can give you ideas for where to look. And the reason that I say that is because there are still people who will go out into natural areas and poach orchids. There have been botanists who are out doing scientific research, and they're followed by poachers sometimes who want to collect where they've collected. And so I'm hesitant to just give out free information, but I'm happy to do that in a more private conversation.
Yeah, and Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the research that you've done in the field around the native orchid? Because that was something I found really fascinating as we were doing the initial research, that there is still pretty prevalent, and it's something that you're an expert on. Sure,
yes. So Plutantra, as I mentioned, is our most diverse group of temperate orchids in North America. So far, most of my studies have been focused on just a small group of those, the less charismatic species, but they're biologically more interesting to me because they do a lot of weird things. They have odd pollination strategies, and they engage in a lot of hybridization. So my lab focuses on understanding the evolution of those different forms and how they've spread across the landscape. There are also an awful lot of rare species within the genus Platantra, and we're increasingly seeing those populations disappear from the landscape. Sometimes we know it's because areas are being turned into other sites for other uses, but sometimes they're just kind of disappearing because of factors that we don't fully understand yet. And so there's a lot of interest in trying to understand what those natural factors are. Orchids kind of go through these cycles of boom or bust on their own because of soils, because of climates and such. And so there's a lot of active research in trying to understand the reasons for those cycles so that we can prevent them and perhaps reintroduce the species into natural areas that can support them.
Thank you, Lisa. We have a question here from Kenneth Cameron. It says, I noticed that the 3D glass piece has vanilla beans woven together into the shape. Can you describe that or show it up close? And so we're going to come up close into this one for you. Yes, it does. So at one point, the artist had actually proposed this idea of having vanilla beans out in the space so there'd be an olfactory component to the exhibit and the installation. So as you walked into the space, you'd be overcome with saccharine vanilla. And she ended up deciding against that, but she did create this piece to touch on it a little bit. She felt like this dome was her way of starting to do a little nod to the vanilla bean. And she did do like an interesting crisscross in that juxtaposed up with the dried flowers themselves. And it's a really neat little standout piece, which I think is wonderful foreshadowing for the conversation that we're going to have with her later on in the cross-pollination series. We have another question here from Natalia Kent. Charlotte and Brett, can you talk a bit about the play between craft and concept in the constellation of this show? Yeah, we can talk a lot about that, craft and concept. So, you know, I would say on a personal level, I don't think that craft is a four-letter word. I love craft. I am a craft person myself. I'm a maker. And so I really value labor and this idea of multiplicity. Like I think about David Willis's piece, and for me, the high concept in it is the very fact that he has had this incredible labor. It's been a labor of love to create it. But conceptually speaking, we knew that we wanted to really kind of have a kaleidoscopic approach to the way that we considered orchids. And we wanted to make sure that we were touching on some very important subject matters and being very diverse with our representation. So we have African-American artists, we have international artists, Canadian, Iranian, Australian. We have artists that identify as they. We have artists working in a variety of different kind of media. And so part of this concept for us was being as expansive as possible in the way that we consider the artists themselves. And then Brett, do you want to say a bit more about that?
Sure. It's a great question, Natalia. I agree with everything that Charlotte said. I think with Charlotte's background and my background, we have found that when we collaborate, there's a really, really nice balance, a really nice yin yang, where I'm often interested in kind of out there wild conceptual work, and she's much more deeply rooted in craft, but we're both really interested in concept. And I think the product of our graduate school of going to RISD is that we're both really interested in how things are made, the really clear appearance of the hand at work. And we definitely wanted there to be a really diverse group of artworks in the show because we wanted it to be welcoming to a really diverse group of people. And when I say diverse, I just mean conceptually and appearance-wise. We put certain limitations on our concept for the exhibition. Everything had to be about orchids. A lot of artists wanted to know if they could include other flowers and other plants, and we were just very, very, very hard line about that. And after that, we gave pretty much a carte blanche approach, which we were hoping, and I think we achieved a really wide swath of different types of work, from more craft-based approaches to more conceptual. Doesn't really seem like the right word, because I don't think that craft is a dirty word either, but I think maybe more traditional fine art approaches. I think somebody like David Willis is a good example, because I think he's kind of bridging the two. He's in between. Brennan Baylor maybe is more traditional, what you think of as a traditional fine artist, but we really wanted there to be something for everybody. This is, as Charlotte said, the second changing exhibition. So we really want people to feel welcome. We wanted them to be surprised by the vibrancy of the exhibition. And we wanted that to reflect what we soon discovered was the vibrancy of the plant that we were referencing and talking about. I think as an artist and an organizer and somebody who's interested in exhibitions, this is kind of a dream project where the deeper you dig, the more excited you get. And to have subject matter like the orchid family, it's really just kind of a dream come true. Having access to botanists and scientists and horticulturalists to talk to make sure that our research was sound, and then getting to do all these video studio visits with artists. So yeah, we wanted everybody to come to the party, basically.
Yeah, and I have to call out Darrin and Lisa really quickly. We felt like everything that like fell out of their mouth was just genius. You know, I think that as artists putting together the show, we had a really specific eye, But for instance, even the title, Orchids, Attraction and Deception, was something that just like fell out of Darrin's mouth at a meeting. I was like, Darrin, why do you like orchids? He's like, it's their fact that they can attract and deceive their pollinators. And I was like, you just titled the show. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, you know.
We're their fangirls now.
Sorry?
We're fangirls now.
For for Darrin and Lisa, it's true. So, and I think that one thing that we had really hoped to do is to root in tradition and end sort of in concept. But, being able to work with the Oak Springs Foundation was a really phenomenal partnership. We have to actually thank the VMFA for that, who we were partners with, and they were the ones that turned us on to the Oak Spring Foundation. So thank you, VMFA, for that, the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, and our great partners there. Yeah. We had one other question from Colin McKinnon. He said, what was it like to have to take so many pieces from our permanent collection and move them up here? What a task. Actually, it wasn't as hard as one would think. We only had a couple pieces that already had orchids in them, primarily the Deborah Moore, and then the Paul Stankard. Paul Stankard's so simple. It's a tiny little orb. And we actually have a beautiful Susan Orlean quote that will go on the wall next to that pretty soon. And I don't know, Brett, if you can like go through your notes and read that, but I thought maybe it would be nice to perhaps end with reading those two quotes. The one that Callista had mentioned, and hi Callista, by the way, we understand that you're also on this and we really appreciate your presence. And then maybe the Susan Orlean, and that might be a nice way for us to close out this today. Oh, are you there, Brett?
Yes, I am here.
Sorry, I totally put you on the spot to look that up.
No, that's just fine. I think I have those quotes right here for you. They're always nearby because they've been real touchstones for us in planning the show. So the Susan Orlean and the Joan Didion, were those the two kind of that you were thinking as well, Charlotte?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
There's the Paul one too that actually is gonna, what's his name, Paul Strand? I forget.
Oh, the Paul Strand, yes.
Yeah.
So the Paul Strand quote I'll grab in a moment. The Joan Didion, or the Susan Orlean, obviously from her really famous book, The Orchid Thief. The quote is, "The world is so huge that people are always getting lost in it. There are too many ideas and things and people, too many directions to go. I was starting to believe that the reason it matters to care passionately about something is that it whittles the world down to a more manageable size. It makes the world seem not huge and empty, but full of possibility," which I think is an incredible metaphor for a lot of the individual pieces in the show. I felt like it was an incredible metaphor for the honor and the joy of working on planning this exhibition while the world sort of exploded around us and we were trapped in our homes. We had this very specific thing to focus on. And the Paul Strand is actually the introduction from a book called Cross-Pollinations by Gary Nabum. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, which was recommended to us by Callista Lyon as part of our ever expanding reading list for the exhibition, which maybe we'll put online at some point. We've sort of compiled an incredible reading list that is just as kaleidoscopic as the types of work in the show. But Paul Strand, the wonderful poet, said, "The true artist, like the true scientist, is a researcher using materials and techniques to dig into the truth and the meaning of the world in which he himself lives. And what he creates, or better perhaps what he brings back, are the objective results of his exploration."
Thank you, Brett. And thank you everybody for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure and an honor. Thank you to all of our partners, to our sponsors, to all of these incredible collaborators, and to all of the artists. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you on one of our other virtual platforms. Have a great day.